You don't have weeks to address heating issues in the middle of the New York winter.
Something we should look at it, though. And it was just one other comment in regard to the Main Street program. That is such a good program for small communities who have a commercial section to be able to convert their second floors on these buildings into apartments. It brings people into the so-called downtown areas. I mean, people would laugh when they call them downtown, and it's like a crossroads, but nevertheless. And it also gives people access to more camaraderie among other people living down there. So I do support the increase in funding in that one.
It is a great program. It's proven to have a huge impact on distressed downtowns, urban and rural, although, you know, from our point of view, it's worked very, very well in rural places.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Assembly?
No.
Senator Kruger had a question?
Hi, thank you so much for your testimony. So, in a nutshell, you were sort of going down a laundry list of programs for rural housing and asking for increases. I'm assuming that based on the dollar amount the governor's committed to affordable housing, you think that based on the expectation of distribution, there really should be enough money being put in the budget to make sure all of these programs are seeing the level of increases. Is that your understanding?
Yes, absolutely. And we have seen this pattern play out before with the J.P. Morgan Settlement Chase funds, for example, have been distributed to existing programs and have enhanced those existing programs, and we would hope that this creates an opportunity to do more. And also, again, the opportunity to get into the larger capital programs. Again, the Housing Trust Fund focused very much on leveraging tax credits. It's very difficult to find a project of scale in rural communities that can be competitive in the trust fund. So perhaps that additional resource will help backfill areas like that as well.
And is there some program that we don't have that we should have for rural housing, as opposed to we've developed pretty good programs, we've just been underfunding them for
again, I think that our members who are the practitioners in this field are comfortable with the body of program. There are, sometimes implementation issues. There are sometimes, programs. I think the evolution of the Rural and Urban Community Investment Fund are kind of interesting to watch, because it is, you have written a fairly broad statute with a lot of eligible activities, and watching the agency sort of work through its own prioritization of those activities and their assessment of what is realistic and feasible to be funded. But we're disappointed the rural area revitalization program isn't there, or has been there sporadically. It's been funded when there are, at moments like this, when there seems to be housing money on the table. RARP and UI gets some money, we spend it out over a couple of years, and then come back looking for more. So that's important. We mentioned in the written testimony the infrastructure development program, which is, again, one of those sporadically funded programs that's done an enormous amount of good in terms of, particularly, again, on the rural side, where we're doing developments in small towns where public infrastructure is lacking, and it allows us to sort of absorb the extra costs of trying to figure out how to deal with sewer and water in places that don't have sewer and water systems. What our members are also finding is that individual private residences in low-income ownership situations in rural places have enormous needs for wells and septic system. We've got the Hoosick Falls thing going on at this point, although that's public and private. We're beginning to see private wells testing positive as well. And so finding some mechanism, I guess finally to get around to answering your question, Senator, some way to address the private infrastructure needs of low-income homeowners upstate is probably the one gap missing that we see.
And then finally, because a earlier testifier stated that New York State was 50 out of 51 for foreclosure rate, and then broke down into areas of the state where our foreclosure rates were disproportionately high, and it seems to be more in rural New York. Do you have any sense why we have a bigger problem with foreclosures in rural New York at this point in history than almost anywhere else in the country?
It's kind of an interesting conversation. Some of the difference between what had the foreclosure crisis that impacted my experience, the throughway cities, had more to do with predatory lending type approaches in minority communities and urban places. In rural places, it's much more traditional sorts of foreclosure. It's the lousy economy. People without sufficient incomes to support mortgages. As was mentioned earlier, many of us are about one step away from a financial crisis, through a healthcare crisis, an unemployment crisis, some sort of family crisis. So I think they tend to be more economic. We also see a fairly high proportion of, a higher than comfortable proportion of property tax foreclosures. There were hotspots in Senator Young's district some years ago, not too many years ago, where we saw a huge number of foreclosures based on inability to pay local property tax. So again, generally in rural areas, it tends to be as more economic than predatory lending driven, the foreclosure problems.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jackie Kilmer, CEO, Harlem United.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much for the opportunity to testify before you today. My name is Jackie Kilmer, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Harlem United. Harlem United has 28 years' experience in providing critical health, housing, and human service to people with multiple complex needs. With 625 units of supportive housing, 3,000 primary care visits to our 3 federally qualified health centers, 2 AIDS Adult Day health care programs, mental health, harm reduction, syringe exchange, community-based outreach and preventive screenings, Harlem United is able to level the playing field for more than 15,000 New Yorkers each year. The vast majority of the New Yorkers that we serve are among the most disenfranchised citizens of New York. Homeless or unstably housed, living with HIV and AIDS, hepatitis C, diabetes, extreme poverty, substance use, and mental health issues. I'm here today to offer testimony on the importance of supportive housing in ending the homeless crisis we are currently facing across New York State and in cutting healthcare costs, particularly for people living with chronic conditions, including HIV and AIDS and mental health and substance use issues. We've heard testimony already on the statistics of homelessness in New York City and across the state, and we know we're in a crisis situation. Ending this crisis will require significant investments in the most cost-effective strategy proven to be the only meaningful and lasting way to end homelessness for those with the greatest needs, and that strategy is supportive housing. Supportive housing is a relatively low-cost intervention of affordable housing combined with patient-centered care that links high-need individuals and families with physical health, behavioral health, and support services, including medication adherence, which can be critical for those suffering with physical and mental illnesses. Supportive housing not only breaks the cycle of homelessness and institutional care for our most vulnerable citizens, it pays for itself in reduced costs for shelters, hospitals, and psychiatric care. A 2013 study by the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene evaluating the New York 3 supportive housing program showed an average net savings of $10,100 per year per unit, with 9,000 units slotted for the New York 3 program. That is significant savings. Beginning with the successes of our own first 60 units of supportive housing in 1991, we at Harlem United know firsthand that supportive housing can reduce the number and length of hospital stays, the number of emergency room visits, and the number of psychiatric hospitalizations. Our supportive housing program allows us to reach HIV-positive individuals with routine testing and link them to and retain them in care in order to achieve suppressed viral load. In turn, a suppressed viral load brings health benefits not only for the individual, but will drastically reduce the risk of transmission to others. Year after year since 2011, in our own New York 3 supportive housing program, we have seen great success, and that success continued in 2015. More than 95% of our clients in the program in December 2015 were linked to care. 79% were virally suppressed. In 2015, 77% of our clients in supportive housing had had at least one primary care visit every 6 months. In our world, housing truly is healthcare. Last year at this time, the governor's Ending the AIDS Epidemic Task Force, of which Harlem United was a member, had just completed its work on the historic blueprint to end the AIDS epidemic by 2020. We're now in the implementation phase. Failure to make adequate investments in the recommendations contained in the blueprint at this critical juncture could very well mean failure to reach our goal of ending the epidemic by 2020. Investments in supportive housing are an integral component of the blueprint. For an estimated 10,000 New Yorkers with HIV, homelessness or housing instability poses a formidable barrier to retention in care and effective antiretroviral treatment. Access to stable housing is a core component of effective HIV health care. We support the governor's plan to address the homeless crisis with the creation of new supportive housing units, including the 20,000 units over 15 years. We do share the concerns raised earlier, including those raised by Senator Krueger, about the need to ensure that the 20,000 units over 15 years actually become a reality. We also join with our colleagues at the Supportive Housing Network to urge the legislature to support the need for the state to commit to funding these 20,000 units over 15 years and support the governor's plan to build the first 6,000 units over the next 5 years. There's no question that capital funding to increase the supply of available supportive housing units is necessary. However, it must come with an ongoing commitment to provide for the services and operating funds that are necessary to make the housing truly supportive and successful. To that end, we urge that an additional $33 million in year one funding for the state's share of the cost to expand HIV/AIDS Services Administration, or HACA, benefits to be added to the budget. This expansion will ensure life-saving social services to an estimated 7,300 HIV-positive New York City residents who are currently homeless or unstably housed, but unable to access HACA benefits because of outdated medical eligibility requirements. In addition, we urge that an additional $17 million be included in the budget for year one funding to cover 100% of the cost of statewide access to HIV rental assistance for low-income people living with HIV outside of New York City. To date, state HIV housing assistance has not been made available to low-income New Yorkers living outside of New York City, leaving an estimated 4,000 to 6,000 people living in upstate New York and on Long Island with unmet housing needs. We would also urge that the statewide HIV rental assistance program be implemented in such a way that the contribution to rent from income be limited to 30%, which would then thus mirror the 30% rent cap protections in New York City. The recent killing of a resident of a shelter in East Harlem by his roommate, both men reportedly suffering from mental illness, highlights once again the critical need for the overhaul of the shelter system, funding for appropriate staffing and security, but even more importantly, funding for affordable housing and the right treatment and supports for citizens who are living with these chronic conditions that can be treated and controlled, but only in the right environments and with the right supports. It is our responsibility to fix this, and we have the tools, and we know that they work. New York has led the nation in proving that supportive housing is the permanent solution for homelessness and other housing instability. Harlem United values the critical role that the legislature has played in this effort. You are true partners in this work. We urge you to continue to invest in and elevate supportive housing as a means to achieve these ambitious but reachable goals. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Gilmer, thank you so much for your testimony. Certainly I am witness to firsthand to some of the great work that you've been able to do over the years. And you've issued a clarion call, so to speak, of I guess, not be penny wise and pound foolish. Are you somewhat optimistic about the money that the governor is putting into this year's budget as opposed maybe some prior years?
We are optimistic. We would like to see more. Thus the call for the additional $33 million for the city and $17 million for statewide. But we're optimistic that we can get there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Calvin Parker, Executive Director, New York Housing Conference.
Thank you.
This is tomorrow's program, right? You're going to give us a little bit of it? It's a little heavy here.
It's a little, pardon?
Heavy.
Oh, I'm going to just do some highlights.
All righty. There's a clock in front of you, just in case.
Okay, I appreciate that. I know it's been a long day. Thank you. My name is Calvin Parker. I'm testifying on behalf of the New York Housing Conference, and I'd like to thank Chair Young, Chair Farrell, Chair Little, and Chair Wright, as well as the other members here, for giving me the opportunity to submit our comments on the 2016-2017 housing budget. The Housing Conference is a nonprofit affordable housing policy and advocacy organization. Our mission is to advance city, state, and federal policies and funding to support the development and the preservation of decent and affordable housing for all New Yorkers. We analyze public policy, educate and convene stakeholders, and raise public awareness regarding New York's need for affordable housing. We are a broad-based coalition, a member organization comprised of a balanced mix of nonprofit, private developers, owners, managers, professionals, and funders of affordable housing. And our strength, I believe, is what I said about being broad-based. I'm sure the committee members here recognize the tremendous need for housing, and it's been touched on by a number of people. So I've got a page of statistics that I'm just going to skip through, but I'm hoping that we can talk about the efforts the state is making moving forward to address those needs. And I want to begin by commending the governor and Commissioner Rubin for recognizing the tremendous housing needs, and in particular their proposed budget that provides an unprecedented state support for homeless initiatives. And I think most importantly, because it recognizes the connection between homelessness and the overall need to produce more affordable housing. You've heard that from a lot of the speakers and my colleagues today. The centerpiece is obviously this $2 billion House New York program. We're all waiting anxiously to see what the details of that program will be, but however it works out, it's important that it address some of the priorities, the main priorities that we have been focusing on here in New York. First, to build more supportive housing for homeless people, and it is clear that I think that the governor's program will address that priority. I think some of the unanswered questions are how the new program will coordinate the state efforts with the local efforts. It's important that they work together and not at cross purposes. We believe that it would be great, since this is such a difficult problem, if the state could establish statewide and regional goals to reduce the ranks of the homeless and to issue periodic reports about what's working and what isn't. As you've heard from a number of the speakers, we also think it's critical that we preserve public housing, and especially in New York City, where it is such an important part of the overall landscape. We applaud the $100 million that was appropriated last year, and we urge you to make that a longer-term commitment and to provide funding in each of the next 5 years at that $100 million level. We understand it's important, and we believe it's essential that the funding language make sure that these funds go for the most pressing capital needs, including roof replacement, mold remediation, as determined by a physical needs assessment of the properties. We also recommend an additional $75 million to support the new RAD rental assistance demonstration projects, and to make New York State competitive with the other states in the nation in getting access to this federal funding subsidy. You've heard from a lot of people that it's important that the state budget address senior housing. We would want to just re-emphasize that and make sure that the House New York program does have adequate funding for senior housing. We believe the best way to do that is to create a new program separately for them. You've heard from some people that some of the projects are too small and therefore they are not feasible for tax credits. The way to ensure that all of the projects with seniors in it that need to be funded are funded is to create a separate program. And we're suggesting that this program be funded at $50 million a year over the next 5 years. Another priority that we've talked about here and some of our colleagues have talked about is assisting homeowners to preserve neighborhoods and to address foreclosure. You've heard a lot about that, so I will just refer you to my testimony about some of the individual things that can be done. Another issue that we are working on is support for the state housing tax credit, known as SLIC. You've heard about that too. It's especially important because it helps us address issues across a wider band of income ranges. While it's great that all these funds have been made available, I think it's important that the state take efforts to make sure that the program rolls out in an effective and coordinated manner, including coordination with its local partners. We also think it's important to make sure that the state uses its existing tools as effectively as possible. You've heard from a number of speakers about the volume cap. It's very important that it's a limited resource, and it's very important that this volume cap work in support of the overall housing program that's been announced. We would like to see housing prioritized over the other users of the budget, the bond volume cap. We'd like to increase the transparency, but we don't support new requirements that would add additional layers of review. So I think I managed to race through that in close to the time. I just want to say that we appreciate again your offering us the opportunity to speak, and I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you very much. Assembly? Yes.
Mr.
Oakes.
Mr. Saladino.
Oh, Mr. Saladino.
Thank you, sir. I've been sitting here listening to one speaker after another, and what I'm hearing is that the need for these programs continues to be on the rise.
Yes.
Therefore, there are more and more consumers. Is that something that everyone is in agreement on?
Yes, I think you're hearing a lot of the same thing because the housing organizations have really done something that they haven't done in the past as much as gotten together and are working together for a joint effort to prioritize the true needs. And the needs in New York are tremendous, as you've heard from all the statistics. And there's great programs, and we're happy to see that the budget is expanding the amount of money that's going for affordable housing.
That addresses how to produce more supply. But what is going on behalf of the state, the not-for-profit organizations, and all the others to reduce the need for this supply?
Well, I think there's a number of things that can be done. The programs that are in this capital program are sometimes oriented toward the production programs, but the state and localities offer a number of programs to provide assistance to existing homeowners to make sure that they don't lose their homes through education. There are also programs to provide assurance to renters that through rent stabilization that they don't lose their home through just up through the ceiling increases. So there are ways to take the existing resources that we have and to make sure we don't lose them. So preservation is a really critical part of this whole thing in addition to production.
And is one of the needs that the supply issue keeps growing? Is it people losing their jobs? Is it companies moving out of New York State? Is it folks who are dealing with higher and higher property taxes and more difficult making ends meet?
Well, there's a number. The housing problems range, and there are, if a neighborhood is hot, there are people who can't afford to stay there. If a neighborhood is not hot, there are people who want to stay there, and their housing values are going down, and they may become upside down in their house. So you can actually be on both ends of that spectrum and still find problems. But, you know, those of us in the affordable housing field are focused on how important housing is. It's one of the most important things. You've heard a lot from people who say that, you know, it provides the foundation for, you know, giving your kids a good education, and and it also has the value of being an economic driver in economic development. So it is a really important thing, and as times get tighter, people find, especially in New York, that they have more difficult time affording the housing they would like to have.
So it sounds as though, and would you agree, that we should be spending more time on keeping more businesses here in New York, attracting more businesses, providing more jobs, keeping property taxes down as some of the drivers to avoid this falling off the wagon where people need the housing subsidies and the housing programs?
Well, you said a number of things, and I don't know that I am qualified in particular to respond on some of those larger questions about public policy. As I said, I don't want to really speak about taxation because I'm not prepared to do that, and our organization is a broad-based group of people, and I'm sure that, you know, we would be happy to get back to you with some answers to some of these more general questions. But, you know, what I'm focused on is the need for additional support for housing, and I'm just trying to lay out how and why that can happen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brianna Gilmore, Director, Planning and Recovery Practice, Community Access.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for hearing testimony today. I'll say this is actually the second time that Assemblyman Wright will hear testimony from me just this year on this issue, so I thank him for his patience, and I thank all of you for the opportunity to speak with you today. My name is Brianna Gilmore. I work in organizational planning and advocacy with Community Access. We're a New York City-based public health agency that offers over 1,000 units of supportive housing around New York City. And our primary consideration is for the mental health needs of people in long-term recovery from a diagnosed mental illness and substance use, as well as the social needs that often impact mental health concerns, particularly for us, homelessness or housing insecurity, unemployment, social integration, and certainly health insecurity. I will not be the first person today to obviously address how the needs around homelessness have changed. Just to give you some context, when Community Access built its first supportive housing unit in the 1970s, it was with a few parents who were the parents of adult children who had cycled out of state psychiatric centers in New York City for decades. So these were individuals in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who had never been able to make it work in their homes, in their communities, were often brought back to the psychiatric center and to jail. The needs of our participants today are much different. We have a lot more families moving into our supportive housing units. We have a lot of people who have experienced recent economic crises, and we have about a 4,000 person waiting list for our community access housing, many of which have just come in to experience acute and chronic homelessness because of the economic crisis starting in 2007. We also have an unprecedented need for housing that can accommodate young children and children who, for the first time, are experiencing the tragedy and trauma associated with life in the shelter system and on the streets. So still the primary consideration for people in our shelter system waiting for housing are mental health and substance abuse needs, but it's no longer about necessarily treating chronic needs, but dealing with the emotional and psychological and traumatic issues that come along with acute and newly chronic homelessness for individuals who have never been in the system before. So we're obviously thrilled that the governor has committed 20,000 units of supportive housing this year across the state, combined with the 15,000 unit commitment from Mayor Bill de Blasio earlier in the fall. This will really meet the 30,000 unit need in New York City. But to be honest, I'm still rather shocked that this commitment was made. All of us are familiar with the rather tense rhetoric over the past year and a half around the New York 4 agreement and the commitment of the dollars for these beds. And so, still this kind of politically tenuous situation, I feel consistently shifts the discussion away from the tragedy of homelessness and on to the politics of supporting housing in New York City. So if you'll allow me, the majority of my testimony today will actually be testimony from two of our housing participants. Community Access really strives to incorporate the lived experience of individuals that live in our housing into our advocacy and into the reasons why we continue to support housing in New York City. And these individuals would be sitting with me here today, except they're actually planning an advocacy event for later this evening. So I'm going to read some of their words for you. This is testimony from Eli Bean, who's been a tenant in Community Access supportive housing for 11 years. I grew up in Brooklyn. I had my own business selling jewelry and clothes. It was the only black-owned factory in America at that time. We lost that business through financial inexperience, and then I became homeless due to substance use and depression. For 10 years off and on, I was homeless. I stayed in cardboard boxes, shelters that were not safe, and drop-in centers and hospitals. For 11 years, I have lived at Community Access. I am involved in community activities. I have my KSAC license. At my permanent residence at Community Access, we have different classes, such as computer classes, computers in the building, a gym, and a backyard. The staff help us with job applications. When I got the apartment, it helped me stay on track. I had a stable place to live. I stopped drinking. I am 10 years sober. For the last 9 years, I have facilitated recovery classes at Cumberland Hospital, and I speak at different places about recovery. Supportive housing gave me my dignity back. I hope everyone gets the chance to live in a place like I do to become a productive member of society. And from Diana Burgess, a tenant in our supportive housing for 6 years, there is a very different path that my life could have taken. I know this because I was on that path. Before Community Access, I fought a long and lonely fight against addiction. My father battled with addiction, and in too many ways, I followed in his footsteps. I did not have a happy childhood, and a lot of my adult life has been in the shadow of that unhappiness. I made a lot of mistakes too, and I hung out with a lot of bad crowds. For 15 years, I had a steady job working for a butcher, but my life never felt that steady, not really. For 5 years, my home was an old abandoned building. I so badly wanted to turn my life around. It was tough. I went from a halfway house to a three-quarter house to a shelter. Finally, in 2010, I left the shelter to become a Community Access resident. It was the start of a new life. I can't count all the ways Community Access has been there for me. They've connected me to so many amazing opportunities and have always supported my recovery. As of today, I have been clean and sober for 5 years. I don't know if that would have been possible without supportive housing. Through Community Access, I've traveled to Albany to meet with elected officials, to Philadelphia to attend a trans health conference, and to Las Vegas to present at America's biggest annual harm reduction conference. All of these experiences have been very special and memorable. I feel part of something bigger than myself. I feel valued. I know the importance of supportive housing. We all have in common the need for a safe, secure, and loving home like the one I finally found at Community Access. So these testimonies are to remind us that the politically vulnerable situation of our supportive housing opportunity in New York City directly impacts the lives and well-being of people on the streets and in the shelter. There are 60,000 stories exactly like this in our shelters today, and each one of them can be impacted supportive housing. So along with other advocates, I'd like to just make a few requests of all of you today. I think there must be legislative will to fuel momentum behind a fourth New York agreement. Without the signing of this agreement, we are really in a vulnerable situation to jeopardize the commitment that the executive budget made to 20,000 new units of housing. A total of 30,000 units of supportive housing should be allocated to New York City to meet the demand. The legislature must maintain the executive commitment for up to 1,500 scattered site apartments over the next 1 to 2 years to immediately ease the shelter census in New York City. I think that a lot of people don't understand how important the rapidity of such a demand must be met. As a contractor for supportive housing units, we are always eager to do what needs to be done to implement new housing, but when we have landlords that kind of are at the mercy of scattered site implementation, and when we have banks that are eager to finance development in new communities, making sure that money gets out the door when it's actually supposed to be offered is very important for agencies to actually be able to implement this housing. Third, the commitment of adequate operating and service rates for all models of supportive housing in order for past and future operations to remain financially viable and programmatically effective. Along with the Coalition for Behavioral Health Agencies, we're actually requesting a multi-part but non-targeted COLA of about $100 million this year, mostly for OMH supportive housing and SROs, and also for new OASIS beds to meet the demands specifically around inflation needs in New York City. And lastly, the commitment to the designation of at least 15,000 of the state-funded units for New York City. So that's where I'll end my testimony today. So on behalf of Eli Bean and Diana Burgess, as well as Community Access, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Questions?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yes.
She's very thorough.
William Penny Pinto, Chairperson of the Housing Committee, Alcoholism and Substance Abuse Providers, ASAP.
Good afternoon. I'm not going to go through my written testimony.
Thank you very much.
I will try to just hit some highlights. Thank you again, Senator Young, Chairman Farrell, and others here, Senator Kruger, Mr. Oaks, Senator Savina. I represent an organization of about 300 addiction treatment provider agencies across New York State, many in New York City, many in the thruway cities upstate, and many in the rural communities. My testimony is about homelessness and addiction, housing, and services. The issues are addiction hits not just single men who are in their 60s, who have been on the street and in and out of jail for decades, but young people. The opioid, heroin, synthetic opioid epidemic, if you will, has higher percentages of people seeking treatment in the small rural counties in the northern part of the state and the western part of the state than literally in New York City in terms of the volume, the proportionality. There are so many women now coming to treatment, caught again in the addiction of the opiates, reminiscent of crack cocaine epidemic, if you will, in the late 80s and early 90s, and heroin addiction in the late 70s and early 80s. So one of the pieces that we try to do with supportive housing for people with addiction issues is to do family housing, not just housing for singles. So one of the pieces where we urge you is in this moving forward process around supportive housing to at least look at a third of the housing to be for families. Half of the women who come to supportive housing in the beginning of a recovery process reunite with at least one child, if not all, who are in foster care. The families who get into supportive housing have the highest rate of stability. The kids don't go back to foster care. There's enormous community life-giving. So we really, really urge you to look at family supportive housing, not just for single adults. The cocaine issues of the 80s and 90s are now heroin opioid of this period, the last couple of years, and moving forward. About 45 to 50% of the people now coming to seek treatment for addiction are under the age of 35, and half are women. So if we can stabilize people into supportive housing, we can help these people rear their kids, return to employment. One of the pieces we do in a model of supported housing is to supply not just the case manager, care manager, that's the typical way of doing supportive housing, but a half-time job counselor, educational counselor for every 10 adults, connect to the community colleges, connect to the certification, skill certification programs to bring people back into employment. If we look in New York City, because of the cost of market rate housing, people stay in supported housing a good long while.